to know what's in our food supply. Label GMOs and let me decide. We've got a right to know what's in our food supply.
Well, thank you very much for being here today. On behalf of IATP, I'd like to thank you all for your activism on these very important issues surrounding the control and the future of our food supply and our agricultural system. Unfortunately, our president, Jim Harkness, couldn't be here today because he's in China doing work on the industrial meat system that is basically started in the United States and now is globalized around the world. I've got just a couple of objectives today. The chief one being to get all of you to write to Senators Franken and Klobuchar and to tell them to support an amendment that has just been put into the Farm Bill by Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. This amendment, the purpose of this amendment is to strip out a provision that was snuck in at midnight, literally, in the last budget resolution. This was an amendment to the budget resolution written by Monsanto, put into the must-pass budget resolution that basically suspends the application of the National Environmental Protection Act. Right now, you have to have a full environmental impacts assessment whenever you have a new crop introduced. And this bill basically kills the National Environmental Protection Act because the Center for Food Safety in Washington, D.C. has successfully sued the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Department of Agriculture for failing to conduct proper risk assessment studies. And for this reason, they want to basically circumvent the law. Thank you. There we go. I want to go back a little bit, however, to try to put this this request of mine in a broader context. Because Monsanto has been circumventing the law for a real long time. And their claims that the regulations that supposedly declare their products to be safe are based in science are also bogus. As Abby said, so my first encounter with Monsanto was back in 1993 when I first joined IATP. And at that time, European veterinarians were refusing to use recombinant bovine growth hormone on dairy cattle to increase the milk production by about 20% because of all of the terrible things that it did to dairy cattle. And that was on the label of the Posilac RBGH product. And then the United States tried to concoct a mutual recognition agreement with the European Union to try to get the European Union to basically set aside its animal welfare laws so that Monsanto could export this product to Europe. Well, flash forward 20 years later, and Monsanto and the State Department and the USDA are still trying to get international approval at the Codex Alimentarius Commission to require all countries to accept the use of this product, which Monsanto no longer owns. It's now owned by Dow Elanco. But it's a terrible product. It does terrible things to cattle. It ends their lives, and all for a very dubious increase in dairy production at a time when there's really too much milk in this country in terms of what farmers can make a living on. One of the things that Monsanto often talks about is sound science, that its products are backed by sound science. Sound science is a PR slogan that was concocted to try to make the argument that secondhand smoke didn't have any effect on health. Okay? So This is a bizarre use of the idea of science, because the science that is presented to the Environmental Protection Agency, to the Food and Drug Agency, is not peer-reviewed science. What gets presented are voluntary presentations by the company of the science that its own scientists have done. And I want to read to you a paraphrase of a letter that Monsanto or other transgenic manufacturers would get, declaring that their products are, quote, safe, unquote. What these letters say, and this is almost verbatim. The letter doesn't say peer-reviewed science and independent testing have found your products to be safe. What it says instead is, we understand that according to data that you have submitted voluntarily to the agency, mostly is confidential business information, so you can't see what that data is, that you understand the products derived from this transgenic event to be safe as their conventional counterparts under the 1986 Framework Agreement on Biotechnology Regulation. It is your responsibility to ensure the continued safety of these products. So that's what safety is, okay? And this is what then our government spends enormous amounts of money marketing for the company. I can recommend to you wonderful work being done by Michael Hansen at Consumers Union, Bill Fries at the Center for Food Safety, Doug Sherman-Gurian at the Union of Concerned Scientists, that can give you much more detail about what an actual approval process looks like. So I'd like to talk with you a little bit about the broader context of how the U.S. government supports Monsanto, even when the Department of Justice has found that Monsanto has violated U.S. law. And here's a few examples of this. Back in 2004, Monsanto bribed the Indonesian government, an official in the Indonesian government, to approve GMOs for import into its country. The agents of the Justice Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, had Monsanto cold. What should happen when you've violated a U.S. law is that you lose all contracts, and Monsanto has hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. government contracts. Instead, the Justice Department, under pressure from the Bush administration, applied a doctrine called deferred prosecution. Deferred prosecution is what you do to juvenile delinquents. You basically say, okay, if you don't do this crime again for 3 years, we're going to wipe the criminal record away. We're going to give you a clean record. So they gave Monsanto this deferred prosecution, $1 million fine, which hardly pays for their stationery. And they were allowed to keep all their contracts. Some of these contracts are really choice. There's a remarkable article that was just published by Food and Water Watch in Washington, D.C. on the basis of 936 WikiLeaks documents. And it shows basically the State Department going around and threatening countries, especially small African countries, saying, if you don't accept these GMOs, if you don't change your seed laws, well, you may not get preferential access to U.S. to export what you provide to the international marketplace, and so on and so forth. And then there are other threats implied. One of the things that's so bizarre about this is that the governments of Ghana and Kenya are not asking for genetically modified #2 yellow corn. What they want, because 40% of their food rots in the fields for lack of cold storage facilities, lack of market roads, lack of drying sheds. So this is what they're asking for help to build. And instead, what we give them are Monsanto pesticides and Monsanto transgenically modified seeds. Another thing that our U.S. Trade Representative has done is when the U.S. lost a decision at the World Trade Organization because of our cotton subsidies, Brazil had the right to $800 million of retaliation against the United States every year. So the U.S. Trade Representative managed to bargain this down to giving Brazil $144 million every year of Monsanto seeds and pesticides. So our government is spending our tax dollars on $144 million of seeds and pesticides in order to buy off Brazil from having further retaliation for a decision that we lost at the World Trade Organization. Now, an honest company doesn't bribe foreign officials. It doesn't buy them indirectly by employing them as lobbyists to rewrite the laws, as they've done in Mexico, as they've done in dozens of countries. And because this company is desperate, because it has a lot of junk bond, a lot of debt rated at junk bonds, they are desperate to remove the Environmental Protection Act. And so what they did is, during the negotiations on the budget resolution in March, they had Roy Blount, the senator from Missouri, drop in a provision in a budget resolution that had to pass unless the government was simply going to break down. And what this provision said was, farmers may plant genetically altered sugars, I think it's sugar beet seed and alfalfa and other transgenic products, even if they have not been subject to a full environmental impact assessment, which is required by the National Environmental Protection Act. So one of the reasons that it's crucial that you write to Senators Franken and Klobuchar and say, this is a company that routinely violates the law, why are you supporting them? Why don't you stand up and show the Senate that we still live in a country that's run by the rule of law and not by the rule of Monsanto? By doing this, you're not only going to restore the rule of law, but farmers are just getting hammered now because the Monsanto products are failing. We now have more than 61 million acres in this country of superweeds. The promise that Monsanto always made was that one application of Roundup would take care of everything, no problems. Now farmers are putting on 3 and 4 applications of Monsanto. So they're losing money. You're having a more poison product, and now the solution that Monsanto is presenting is basically to ask the USDA and the EPA to approve a corn seed, a soybeans that are genetically altered to resist dicamba and 2,4-D, which are basically cousins of Agent Orange. Those of you who are old enough to know what Agent Orange did, both to human health and environmental health, will be horrified that this is even being considered. In order to ensure that these products never come on the market, we have to have a strong Environmental Protection Act. We have to have senators who are willing to stand up to midnight drop-in resolutions and will say, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this anymore because, among other reasons, we have a very inexpensive way of avoiding the need for these products, and that is rotate the crops. Right now we have corn on corn planting, which basically invites all the pest infestation that we now have. So by supporting Senator Jeff Merkley's amendment, which was just introduced on Monday night, you can reestablish the rule of law. You can reestablish our environment, and you can support farmers and the food that we eat. Thank you very much. I believe that there's a postcard that is supposed to be going around to, okay, so good, so good. So we're going to support this amendment, and we are going to beat back Monsanto. Thank you very much.
I was toting my pack along the fields and countryside when along came a crop duster spraying some damn pesticide. It burned my eyes and throat. I couldn't find no place to hide. So I flagged down a funky trip on his way to the March Against Monsanto rally at St. Paul, Minnesota, and I settled down inside. And he asked me if I'd seen so much poison sprayed by just one man. And I said, listen, they're spraying everywhere in this here land. They're spraying everywhere, men, they're spraying everywhere. Across America's farmland, polluting the soil and the water, man. They're spraying all over this world. They're spraying everywhere.